3 months ago at NAB, we asked ARRI's new owner on camera about the future of ARRI rental. Here's what he told us.
On the rental end, we always look at not competing with our clients. And it will be very interesting to see how we can also change this a bit on the ARRI side. If you ask me how, I don't know yet.
Now he knows. ARRI rental is being sold. Also this week, the FCC starts asking questions about some very familiar looking cameras and drones. And the LOFIC sensor technology behind the Osmo Pocket 4P is heading somewhere unexpected. If we see that kind of technology in smartphones before we see it in larger cameras, smartphones will literally have an advantage in terms of dynamic range over traditional cameras. Let's get started.
This is Focus Check, the weekly Cinetech podcast.
Welcome to episode 125 of CineD Focus Check. There's another empty chair, another week, another empty chair. I let Johnny off the hook this week again, but not because he's on vacation. He isn't. He's actually deep in the review of an exciting new camera. And more on that next week. He just really needs to focus on working on that. So it's me alone with a little bit of Felix in the background. Now, let's get right into it. 3 months ago, we asked Thomas Riedel, the new owner of ARRI, a question. And this week, we got the answer. ARRI announced that they are selling their global rental business. It's sold to a private equity company called H2 Equity Partners. Now, at NAB, days after signing, Thomas Riedel said on camera when we interviewed him that he didn't believe in selling to rental houses while competing with them at the rental. Let's look at that clip and then dive right into the news. You know, I found it's curious that both ARRI and Riedel are not only manufacturers but have this huge services business. There's ARRI Rental with locations around the world, being one of the largest, probably largest cinema rentals in the world. But also Riedel being very deep into the events themselves with kind of staff and the technology. So it's not just a provider of the hardware. Do you see a lot of ways to combine here? Because I think that kind of is unique. I can't think of any other, at least camera manufacturer, that has like a huge rental division, for example.
That is kind of unique. Having said that, it's also different. On the Riedel end, we always look at not competing with our clients. So rental companies around the world buy equipment of Riedel and use that and rent that out. And what is the service division of Riedel called Managed Technology is more looking after clients who need either a huge quantity, which is not available otherwise in the market, or a complexity. So basically, if you think of Formula One or SailGP projects we are deeply involved with, and you need something which other players simply can't do, then this division comes in, but not really to compete with our clients. And it will be very interesting to see how we can also change this a bit on the ARRI side. If you ask me how, I don't know yet. This is all work in progress.
So as you see, at that time, he didn't know yet, but now he knows. And we have the news that ARRI Rental is sold. Now, here are the facts. It's a management buyout of the global rental operations in Europe, UK, North America. The company is led by Dana Harrison, who is also becoming the CEO of the global rental business. Financials, of course, private companies are undisclosed. Russell Allen, Tamim SI are also part of this. And as I said, it's H2 Equity Partners, a private equity firm. Illumination Dynamics actually stays with ARRI, which is interesting. And the structural logic here, as I mentioned, every Alexa 35 or whatever camera they sold to an independent rental house or even lighting equipment was a sale to a competitor of ARRI Rental. Now, there has been a decades-old tension around that, and they finally resolved this with a separation. Now, Riedel calls it a milestone in ARRI's strategic transformation. Now, if you haven't seen that interview where we played the clip, I can really recommend you watch that. I'm still very proud that we had access to those three guys, the two management directors and Thomas Riedel for this interview. There's so much information in there about the future of ARRI, which is still very relevant. I really recommend you check that out. Now, it's a bit of an irony, of course, because there was an industry relief that ARRI itself didn't fall to a private equity company, but now the rental arm goes to a private equity here. The structure softens it a little bit because the people who built the business hold the ownership. But the question productions will watch, how does private equity ownership on the horizon basically shape the investment in inventory and exclusive technology? And we had a very good question also in the comments. Is like, there's a couple of ARRI cameras actually and products in general that are rental only. For example, the RE265 is a rental only camera. So the question is, will that be available for purchase in the future for other rental companies as well? Now, what I don't actually know, maybe other rental companies had access to it, but were only allowed to rent it, not sell to end customers. I don't know, but I think it was ARRI rental only so far. Now, of course, the open question here is the exclusive glass that was developed with ARRI rental by really big DPs. For example, we have the Prime DNA, DNA LF, Alpha, Moviecam, Heroes. They have been developed inside the rental organization, often with DPs like Greg Fraser, on Dune and Batman and so on. So how does this travel with a new company, under what name? Because they also announced they will come up with a new name. It's still called ARRI Rental now, because I think the actual transformation, the sale has just been announced. It's not completed, but they will change the name. There will be no ARRI in that name anymore after this transition period. And yeah, we're reaching out for clarification on that. I don't expect to actually get an answer before it's public, but still, it's going to be interesting how they will handle this exclusively developed, especially lenses, because of course that was the unique thing that ARRI got. They had this direct contact to the people who are using their gear through their rental arm. So I believe they might want to keep that close relationship. Maybe there is something in the contract that actually guarantees them this connection also in the future, but we don't know. So let's see. Anyway, so yeah, this kind of caps a restructuring arc for ARRI. I think they sold Clay Packy. They did quite some significant job cuts last year. Then two German facilities were closed. Then of course the Riedel acquisition, and now we see them go deep into the live ecosystem and broadcast with, like we did the coverage of their Eurovision deployment of the Alexa 35 Live here in Vienna. They also recently announced the Alexa 35 Live Extreme for super slow motion, especially for sports. And now this. So it's clear they're becoming a leaner, more manufacturing focused company. And they no longer want to compete with their own customers, which is I think the right way to go. I just hope they will keep that close relationship to the actual filmmakers, because that's something that I experienced firsthand at Eurovision, how close they are to the actual productions. And it's the exact same thing I know from, like when they talk to Hollywood DPs on their productions. There's literally, they have ARRI technicians on speed dial, and those are the people actually making the cameras and the product managers. So I hope that remains the case, even though they let go of ARRI rental. Now, just because it's kind of connected to ARRI, I'm also adding a little hardware news here. P&S Technik HEXAMO mount was announced, which actually brings the Leitz HEKTOR primes to the ARRI Alexa. Now, this is, of course, in the Alexa ecosystem. It's a small niche, but if you want to use the, quite popular, I would say, in the high-end Leitz HEKTOR primes, you can use this adapter to connect them to the Alexa platform. And this is out now. It's nice to hear news from P&S Technik, of course, also a Munich-based company that has been in the accessory business for a very long time, always looking at very high-end solutions. And so basically you're kind of removing the original Alexa mount block by loosening a couple of screws and then put in this HEXAMO camera mount. And it's kind of a bit of a process, but it is possible. So check that out if you are interested in that. Now let's move on to the next big block here, and that is related to DJI versus the FCC. Now, as you might remember, just a bit of a recap, we know the troubles that DJI has with the US government. They basically banned from introducing any new products into the US, which is of course a huge problem for them. And this also includes products like the Osmo Pocket 4P and also all the new drones. If you look at, all the latest products from the last 6-7 months, almost none of them made it into the US retailers like B&H, for example. And of course, especially for popular products like the Osmo Pocket 4P, that's a huge problem. I guess that's also the reason why that product hasn't been globally launched yet, even though, everybody kind of has it already. We are working on a review of it. There's a lot to say about the Osmo Pocket 4P, which we will do in time when the embargo is lifted. But so far, their problem is they can't sell into the US. So there has been very, I would say, it's not evidence, but kind of rumors that there were a couple of brands in the US, for example, under the name Extra or Sky Rover, that actually sold products that looked extremely similar to DJI products in the US market. Now, the thing is, it seems like a lot of people said that those were just DJI products in disguise, and apparently the US government caught on. I can just clearly say none of the DJI links are confirmed. Each company positions themselves as independent, and now 8 different companies were fined $25,000 each for not responding to the FCC for letters, actually, not for products themselves. It was basically just they were seeking clarification. Now, $25,000 each is not a lot of money for a big company or for big companies, I guess, but this is just a sign of things to come, I guess. So, because there's actually a covered list that blocks new radio authorizations. So if those companies are added to this covered list, they also cannot introduce new products. And the FCC granted itself power to retroactively revoke authorizations for products merely containing a listed company's component. And that's how the drone policy against DJI, which really clearly actually stops them from selling drones in the US, how that reaches a pocket camera. Because of course, there is radio transmission developed by DJI in the pocket camera, and that's why that can also not be introduced to the market. Now, what's of course interesting, and I'm just gonna, show it as it is on the web. If you go to the Extra website, they are teasing a product called the Extra Muse 2 Pro, which, to be fair, is not exactly the same as a Pocket 4P. You see that the screen is actually here to the side. It's not in the middle. Other than that, it looks very similar. And they actually have a headline here which says from Pocket to Pro, which might or might not be with a little bit of a wink. And then, of course, the Sky Rover website, I think there's like 2 drones up there. I forgot what they're called, S1 and something else, which are also a little bit different, but very much similar. For example, one of them is yellow. And So let's see where this goes. Our editorial stand here is I really have a problem with the inconsistency here. If you think about Insta360, which is also Chinese, they also carry radios, right? Each one of them has wireless transmission. The Luna Ultra sells freely on US shelves, while DJI fights Insta360 in a US court and can't legally sell its competing pocket product there, a category they arguably invented. You know, like, I mean, there hasn't been anything like that before the original pocket camera. And now the Luna Ultra looks very much like the Pocket 4P. Now, I think scrutiny applied evenly is fine, but an identical radio transmission device treated as a threat behind one logo and then it's a non-issue behind another one is not a coherent security policy. And that's the problem here for me. Now, the practical takeaway for anybody who owns DJI products in the US, who's listening, gear that you own stays legal. It's the importers and the certifications that are the targets, not the end unit, not the end users. So it's really, you know, they don't try to mess with what you already have. We have heard, of course, it is possible to get, you know, like, I mean, we live in a very global world and we know from a lot of people in the US who are actually buying the Osmo Pocket 4P through eBay from a Chinese reseller. You know, it's possible. Of course, you will have to pay a little bit more because of that, but it is possible. Yeah, so I'm not going to say anything more about the Osmo Pocket 4P because I'm not allowed to under the embargo, but I'm very excited about this camera. It's just very cool to work with and I'm getting some amazing results and I'm very happy to share more when we are allowed to. I can also announce that we are lab testing the Osmo Pocket 4P and the Luna Ultra, which is not an easy feat because they have fixed lenses and there are some complications that we needed to work on in practical terms when it comes to the EMA test chart when you work with a fixed lens that is relatively wide, but we solved them and I'm very much looking forward to sharing results when we can. Yeah, just sticking with the topic of the Osmo Pocket 4P, I want to mention the SmallRig split filter kit for the 4P. Because it's quite interesting. Now, of course, there's a lot of different companies already offering ND filters for the 4P. We have some from Tilta. We have the original ones from DJI. I think Moment makes some. Polar Pro makes some. And now we have this here from SmallRig. Now, the cool thing is they offer, it's like a stackable system. You can combine various filters with each other. And I think you can stack up to 2 of them together. There's different strengths of ND. There is also a circular polarizer. And I think there's even something like a diffusion as well. And the cool thing is there's a variable ND, you know, literally turnable variable ND that you can put on top. For example, a VND 1-5 filter. I haven't seen this from anybody else yet. Might be out there, but this seems really cool. And then you can, there's different systems actually in 3 configuration. The first one pairs a fixed ND16, ND64, and ND256 with a CPL. And then you can have a variable ND, as I said, the 1-5 combined with a CPL and quarter black diffusion. And then the third one would be ND16, 64, and 256 with both a CPL and a quarter black diffusion. So like it's basically different sets that you can buy. I think it seems like SmallRig really put a lot of thought into that, and I find that quite useful because as you will see, once we are able to release our review of the 4P, of course it needs an ND filter. Unfortunately, I didn't have one in Malta when I was invited at their event. But yeah, just for the proper motion blur and to get down to a 50th of a second shutter speed when shooting at 25p. You just need to use ND filters, and this seems like a really cool set. When we look about pricing, they start, it's around $45 to $50, so quite affordable, and definitely worth a look if you're in the market for Osmo Pocket 4P. Now, moving on to the sensor topic of this week, which is also kind of connected to the Osmo Pocket 4P. The 4P is the first product that we have in the market that I'm aware of, actually, that has the LOFIC sensor. Now, the LOFIC sensor, that's the one thing that I can talk about. DJI claims 17 stops of dynamic range. And the way this works is basically, it stands for Lateral Overflow Integration Capacitor. Sounds like something from Back to the Future. But it is a new technology of... I'll just read what I have in my notes here. Overflow charge that would be lost when a photodiode saturates gets stored instead, expanding highlight capacity. The physical mechanism behind filmic highlight roll-off. A genuinely different route than the industry's dual gain approach, which typically costs rolling shutter. We know dual gain in a lot of the recent cameras because basically the sensor is read out twice within a short amount of time and then combined causes the rolling shutter to double. And this is not the case with this LOFIC technology. Basically, the highlights and the shadows are treated differently and read out simultaneously, but treated differently, which combines it into a higher dynamic range. So far, we only have it in the Osmo Pocket 4P, but now we have Sony announcing a sensor, the LYTIA L910, that has that LOFIC structure as well. And they say 100 decibel of single exposure dynamic range. What that exactly means in stops, I don't know, honestly, but that's how they, in very technical terms, explain it. And it can do 4K 60p HDR, which also sounds very reminiscent of the 4P, actually. What's interesting here is that, of course, this sensor is made for smartphones. We will see this end up in smartphones hopefully soon. I don't know if it's going to be the next generation of iPhones. I don't know if it's going to be the next generation of some Android phone. We will see, but I think it's fair to say it's going to make a huge difference for those devices from the results we're already seeing from the Osmo Pocket 4P. And I can only hope that we will see this technology. There's actually a little embedded video here, but also still where we can see the difference, where they kind of filmed the same scene with two different ways of kind of reading out the sensor, and you see just the higher dynamic range that is captured in this bright environment in the background. Makes it clear what the advantage is here. And there's actually movement in the shot. This is just a still frame that I took out of the video to put side by side, and there is no noticeable difference in rolling shutter actually. But what's really interesting, of course, we want this technology in larger sensors. I think that's where it's going to be really, really interesting. And so far, we only see it in very small sensors. This LYTIA sensor, let me see if I actually find the size here. Not sure if we have a size here, but it is, it's a 1/1.28 inch sensor with a 12.49 millimeter diagonal and 50 effective megapixels. So it's very small, and it's definitely made for smartphones. But I think there's nothing probably that prevents Sony or other companies working on that integrating this technology into larger sensors. So what I'm seeing on the horizon is the gap closing to high dynamic range cameras, like, for example, an Alexa 35 or the Panasonic Lumix S1 II, all of which seem to work so far with, dual gain. But this LOFIC technology seems to be kind of really narrowing that gap. And we are seeing now already that small devices seem to have incredible results. And again, I have to be really careful what I say here because of the 4P, but it's an exciting technology for sure. And it's not something we've seen before. And I'm just looking forward to have this in more devices. What that means also for larger sensors is a question to be asked, because of course, if we see that kind of technology in smartphones before we see it in larger cameras, smartphones will literally have an advantage in terms of dynamic range over traditional cameras, which is crazy if you think about that. So I hope this will happen quite soon also to larger sensor cameras. And, you know, like, I mean, this would probably only speed up this kind of move of the consumer, prosumer to smaller sensor cameras that do computational work like smartphones, as opposed to actually using a mirrorless camera. But only time will tell. Let's see what the first product will be that actually uses this Sony sensor. Now, sticking with Sony, they announced the RX10 Mark V. Now, what's interesting, this is their first iteration of this camera in 9 years. And that's actually, you know, it's one of those compact cameras that it's a category that just has been long neglected because I think smartphones are, you know, like eating the lunch, literally. I mean, now you have smartphones with long telephoto lenses. You have, you know, all kinds of functionalities because this is a small sensor camera essentially, right? So, but they are lacking a lot of the computational technology that smartphones have. So on the other hand, we see companies like Fujifilm really releasing a lot of purpose-built cameras that are intentionally kind of non-smartphone style. You know, like if you look at cameras like the X100VI or, you know, like many others from even the GFX 100 RF, fixed lens cameras, some of them that are very purpose-built for a specific type of shooting, seem to be very popular again. And Fujifilm is probably the most successful one there. Also Panasonic, of course, with some new models. And now, you know, Sony wants some of that cake too. And they probably decided, well, we actually have that compact camera. Let's just give it a refresh. Let's see how that does. Because, of course, that less R&D is needed in just reviving that. And what they did, it's actually the same 20.1 megapixel 1-inch stacked Exmor RS class sensor as in the Mark IV that was announced 9 years ago. But it has a faster processor, the Bions XR, which is the processor that they have been using in all their latest alpha models as well, which has some dedicated AI unit changes that actually help the camera, which introduces real-time recognition autofocus for people, animals, birds, insects, cars, trains, planes, and has 575 focus points and a 71% coverage versus the 65% coverage of the Mark IV. It can shoot 30 frames per second photos without blackout, which is also down to the faster processor. And there's a continuous shooting speed boost. So video, of course, that's the good thing for us video shooters. The strongest story here, it can do 4K 120p, 10 bits 422 S-Cinetone, S-Log 3, none of which was available 9 years ago in the Mark IV. 16 user LUTs can be installed. It has an active mode stabilization, AI auto framing, digital audio via the hot shoe, USB-C, 4K 30p streaming, and what Sony says the best in class for an all-in-one super zoom, which is, what's the range here? 24 to 600 millimeters equivalent. Now, couple trade-offs. There's no pre-capture, which is a baffling omission for something that they call a wildlife camera. So they hopefully can add some pre-capture with a firmware update. The mechanical leaf shutter stops down to f8 above 1/1000th of a second with no automatic handoff to e-shutter. The 30 frames per second burst is only with a lossy RAW. And our A7 V lab test showed that Sony's stated dynamic range is sitting above the measured video dynamic range. And of course, I mean, I don't actually know. We haven't planned to lab test this camera. I'm not sure it's worth doing so, but yeah, let us know. Write us a comment if you're interested in seeing a lab test of this camera. It's not exactly the type of camera we usually test, but because of course the fixed lens, but it's worth thinking about. The problem always is that, those super long zoom lenses that are built in lose a lot of light throughout the range. And, we should test these cameras around 50 mil if possible. So that's the question. No, but let us know if you're interested in that and maybe we'll find a way. It uses a MPFZ 100 battery, which is still the battery standard that, a lot of alpha cameras use up until now. It's not the new standard that the, A7R6 uses. So I'm just guessing here, they might just, might have been too big of an engineering feat to change the body of that camera because it really seems just like a refresh of what they had. So it just sticks with that battery. But I think it's fair enough because it's going to last quite a long time because of the more efficient processor that will need less power. They claim that it's going to be a 50% power boost compared to the predecessor. It's a 3.68 million EVF. It has an alpha style grip and joystick, and it's going to cost you $2,300 or 2,500 euros, 2,200 pounds, available in August. Let us know if you think that a bridge camera like this is still any good in 2026, or, have we moved on thanks to phones and a lot of interchangeable lens cameras in the market? And, but again, I think there is a kind of resurgent of that category. Although if I look at it, I don't see, it's not as stylish as a Fujifilm camera. It's not something that, or the Sigma, what's it called? The Sigma, not the FP, the other one?
BF.
Sigma BF camera. Yeah, that looks beautiful. Like people like to carry that. Those are lifestyle cameras. This doesn't look like a lifestyle camera. So Felix, would you walk around with a camera like this?
Yeah, I think in this regard, I think Fujifilm is very good in making this lifestyle looking cameras. And also I think how is it called? Lumix L10 or something. They also looks pretty stylish. And I think Sony is lacking a bit behind there, but I think
Sony could do quite well if they, just hired a production designer the engineers do great work, but if they had somebody who makes really stylish cameras for them, I think there's a real market. So, but anyway, I think it's for them, it was probably an easy way to update what they had and not take it out of the market. And they're probably looking at how many people are interested in that. Yeah. This episode is brought to you by the Hollyland Pyro S. If you shoot video on film sets, on live events, run and gun ENG work, you know the pain of running monitor cables everywhere. The Pyro S is a wireless video transmitter that fixes that. One transmitter feeds up to 4 receivers at once, so your director, focus puller and client can all watch the same feed, no cables, no capture cards. It transmits 4K at 30 frames per second up to 1300 feet, with latency as low as 50 milliseconds. And with auto dual band hopping across 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, it consistently finds the cleanest channel, so the signal stays rock solid even on crowded sets. HDMI and SDI in and out, a lightweight magnesium alloy shell, and it even streams straight to YouTube or Twitch. Check out the Pyro S at hollyland.com, link in the show notes. And now back to the show. All right, let's stick with Sony for the last bit here. The Sony VENICE 2 got a firmware update 5.0. What's new? There's a new signature preset look for monitoring. There's really no technical documentation published around that. We reserve judgment on the skin tones and highlights until, we see some footage from that. But what's also new, we can now get 4096 by 2160p at 47.95 frames per second over a single 12G SDI line. And that closes a real gap for the 48 frames per second class theatrical large format crowd. So now you can do large format, readout of the sensor in 4K at 48 frames per second via SDI, which will, of course, make a difference if, for live or multicam shoots. CNA2 is usable as a LAN conversion adapter, multicam, remote operation, virtual production. And a small but practical note, the Moray out-of-range visibility in ICV FX mode and a brighter bubble gauge. So update path warning, you must be on the version 4.10 first. So you have to go through the updates that were there. And they've also confirmed a roadmap until 2027, which is interesting. So yeah, I think it's nice that they really seem to be committed to giving this camera a long life, actually. We've also seen this with a Rialto 65 introduction that is compatible only with a Venice 2. So rather than making a large format version of the Venice 2 that they sell separately, they make a Rialto version of the 65 sensor. Again, my honest opinion is there should only be a Rialto version of the Venice. It doesn't matter with which version of the sensor, but you don't need the in-body sensor if you can move the Rialto unit close enough to the main body, right? They should just sell the standard Rialto or maybe the Venice Extension System Mini as a standard package with a shorter cable combined with a body, and then give you the chance to upgrade to the Venice 65. But I don't need the in-body sensor. There's no advantage, especially if you look at the normal Rialto versus the Extension System Mini, which only has the drop-in filters and not the variable ND. But that's just my 2 cents. Maybe that's something for a next generation camera. But I think that's the real USP that Sony has compared to their competitors is this Rialto system, and I would just make it the default. Anyway, next block here, let's move on to a firmware update of the Fujifilm GFX ETERNA 55. Now, firmware 1.10 is just really housekeeping, while white balance stability with PL lenses, included PL adapter, third-party glass, and Fujifilm PL lenses on older lens firmware is the headline here. There's a real production warning that we can say out loud that Fujifilm explicitly warns that color tone may change after updating. So you shouldn't do this mid-project. So you should finish projects shot on the previous firmware before installing. Because of course, if you have in the middle of a project and the footage look changes, that could be a nightmare. What's the bigger news here than this firmware update, which is, is what's coming. First of all, the version 1.20, which will come later this year, will have in-camera MFX playback. It will have a settings backup restore via a dedicated app for rental houses or multicam. Further SDI and HDMI latency improvement, which is great. We've heard some reports that there's a bit too much latency here. And additional anamorphic D-squeeze, including open gate 4K 4x3. And this, of course, I think is something that should have been there from the start, because this sensor, of course, is really great with an anamorphic lens. And it directly serves the 4x3 sensor anamorphic audience that this camera was built for. Now, what's really exciting for me is version 1.30. That's coming in January next year, because it will have automatic electronic ND while holding iris, shutter angle, and ISO constant. Now, this is, of course, a great advantage when you shoot documentary. It's a feature that I love on Sony cameras like the FX6, which, of course, also has an electronic variable ND, or the FX9, because you set it to auto ND and you can just keep your aperture the same, and it's just the ND that's going to change, and it's completely seamless. You don't see it in the image, unlike aperture changes, and that, of course, should change the depth of field. And and what's also coming in that update is Lank wired remote and Fujinon Duo lens control via the multifunction dial. Now, I think, these firmware roadmaps really give people trust for cinema cameras. I think it's something that, every manufacturer should do, especially for more expensive models, because it kind of gives you peace of mind that things are happening, that the company is working on things and they're not working on a successor. And it's great that, Fujifilm seems to follow the Sony path here, what Sony has been doing with the VENICE all along, and also Burano, and in the past also with other models. And I think it's just something you need with a dedicated filmmaking camera. And because and Fujifilm seems to be addressing a lot of the issues that, for example, Johnny had in his first look review of the camera. It's really, they seem to be filling that filmed for IMAX certification that they have better and better. All right. Good. Let's move on to some software updates now. Cadrage Studio has been officially released. We reported about this before. Cadrage is a pre-production suite, which of course is connected to the Cadrage Viewfinder app that is very popular and has been around for a long time, 12 years or so or longer. And as we reported before, it offers a lot of different things, like shot planning, even 3D scanning of floors, and then you will have a floor plan based on your 3D scan from the phone. The script really sits at the center of this, and you can combine it with shot lists and storyboards, and it's really, really comprehensive piece of software. Now they have had a beta running, where you could use it for free. Now the beta phase has ended, and they've introduced the pricing. It's going to be $19.99 per month, or $99.99, so $100 per year. On the annual plan, there's a 7-day trial. So, if you really want to just check it out, go for the trial. It's available in the App Store for macOS and iOS now. It works on iPad and macOS. And they've been using it, like a lot of people have been using it on features and commercials during the closed beta. And now it's kind of a formal opening of the doors. So I think it's cool that they were moving in this direction. I think the functionality that's inside one app here is kind of something that I haven't seen before, because there's a lot of different ways of doing this with different applications, but just kind of combining this in one is kind of, it's really impressive. And I know the team, or some of the team behind this app, and I know they've been working really hard on this for the last 7 years or so. I think the first time that I met with Anselm, who's the head of this team, who's also a cinematographer, by the way, was in 2019, and he told me that they have started working on this, and now 7 years later it's done. So it's definitely worth checking out. This is not something that was done on the weekend, with Cloud Code or whatnot. It's really something that they've spent a lot of time thinking about and working on. So I will definitely check it out, and I'm looking forward to playing with this. Now, sticking with Cadrage and their main competitor, Artemis Viewfinder. I mean, those are really the two biggest viewfinder apps in the App Store, with very similar functions, but still different. And I think both have rightfully their fans. I think they're both, really great to use as viewfinders. Both of those apps announced updates that will give you sun tracking. Now, a lot of people in the audience might know Sunseeker. That's an app that I've been using for years to know where the sun will be at a certain amount of time, at a certain time, when I'm scouting locations, just to really plan where do I shoot my interviews and so on. Now, this functionality is being built into both of those apps. It's already available in the Cadrage Viewfinder, which, by the way, is a one-time purchase. So if you have it, you just get that update for free. It's not a subscription. And with Artemis, they announced that they will integrate their already existing Helios sun, I think it's called Helios Live View, which is their separate sun tracker app that remains available. but they will basically add that functionality into the standard Artemis viewfinder. I mean, this is clearly something, two competitors reacting to each other, but there's also a separate app that might have spurred that. What was it called? Lightframer Pro, which was a new app that was launched only 2 weeks ago, which is a cinema viewfinder with sun tracking. And we reported about that 2 weeks ago. So they're just reacting to that. We'll put the link, of course, in the show notes for all these news and also the Lightframer Pro. So you get a bit of an overview. But there's an abundance of apps now out there, of viewfinder apps that allow you to select the kind of camera, the kind of lens, and the kind of format you are using on those cameras to get a preview of what your field of view would look like. Combine that with the position of the sun. Extremely useful. And then you can take your location photos to plan out your shoot. So, very cool. Yeah, so, and then just to end this episode, a couple of quick hits here. Blackmagic introduced Ultra Studio Express 3G. That is a USB 4 capture and playback device. They're $175 each, so really affordable. USB 4 bus powered, pocket sized. It splits into a recorder 3G and a monitor 3G. They look like this. And they're all SD or HD up to 1080p 60. Unfortunately, there's no 4K for this kind of price yet from Blackmagic Design. 10-bit 422, the DeckLink API, so everything recognizes it. The point here is this is a 1080p family, streaming, archiving, reference monitoring, and as I said, not a 4K box, but it's cheap enough to be an impulse add to your mobile edit or streaming kit. In general, I wish Blackmagic would make more 4K options, because we already, we have the problem that, for example, the ATEM Mini ISO that we're using, we wish that would actually do 4K, because if it did, right, Felix, you wouldn't have to online every week from the 4K streams from these cameras, because this thing only does HD. So
yeah, would mean less work for me, but yeah, I
think a lot of people have this problem now. A lot of people want to stream 4K, and 1080 really starts to look like SD.
Exactly.
A couple years ago, and it's just with these high resolution monitors that we have now.
It's true.
4K has really become the standard, and unfortunately, they're not quite there yet.
I think these devices also get used a lot for bypassing the MAC colors. So if you kind of are color grading and stuff, you can choose this as an output device in DaVinci, and you bypass the
color shift
colors from the Mac OS, which I think a lot of people are using those devices for that purpose especially. And yeah, I think that's kind of useful, as I don't know the price, I think for $175. So yeah,
that's a good point. Yeah, it's really, the price is just, as always with Blackmagic, extremely affordable. So there's not too much to complain here. We just wish we would have a 4K option, even if it was for twice the price, because there's a lot of those devices don't have a 4K equivalent. Of course, you can get 4K from Blackmagic, but then you really look at these large boxes, basically, right?
Yeah, totally agree. I think in 2026, I think 4K is getting almost the standard, and I think they need to hopefully upgrade a bit, that this is the standard. But of course, it's 4 times the resolution. But yeah, hopefully.
I guess it's probably a processing issue. Maybe they don't have as fast processors in their devices, but let's see. I hope that's going to change. Moving on to Tilta, they announced a universal cooling system, which is really affordable. The base kit is $35 or $49 for the power kit. Now, this is a thermoelectric plate which cools your camera. Well, the plate itself cools down to 0 degrees Celsius. There's 3 modes: a TFT, display, USB-C, or magnetic battery. It works across Sony, Canon, Nikon, Fujifilm, and Panasonic Lumix cameras. Now, just keep in mind there's a fan in this, so even the quiet mode may interfere with in-camera mics specifically. But the bigger point here is, this is basically patching a problem that manufacturers built into their small bodies. I mean, you've suffered from overheating Lumix S1 II, right, before? So this might be a solution.
They fixed it with firmware, actually, which is great. I think these type of cooling systems, they are made for this, I don't know, smaller cameras like the Sony EV10 or so. And I think a lot of people are using them for the same purpose like we are doing with several cameras for doing video podcasts and stuff. And there you get always the problem that the cameras overheat because they are running like an hour or so. And I think for that it's a cool fix. But of course, also keep in mind, as you mentioned, that audio is probably unusable from the camera mic because like the fan is super close to the internal mic. So you only have like probably a fan noise on the mic itself. But I think it's, of course, if you don't want to spend too much for a camera system and want to film, I think it's a valid solution, but nothing.
Well, we're hearing from a lot of people who are using this, and we have one comment actually that mentioned it as well, that it's often very hard to tell how much it works, like how much difference it makes, because of course, essentially it's blowing air at a closed body. So it's not like really getting air into the body because it's sealed off. So it's basically trying to cool the surface of a body. So we've had this. I mean, they've done this already for the R5 originally, the Canon, which really overheated in video, and other cameras, and also for the Chronos ecosystem for iPhones. And now they just released a universal version of that. But it's nice to have. It's kind of trying to fix that a problem that the manufacturers created. But I think it's probably something that only affects current cameras. We can already see a lot of newer cameras that have less of this problem, because as soon as they shrink down the process of how a chip is made, like with 1.5, 3 nanometer process, it needs less power, and less power means less heat, right? So, but still, I mean, it's great that Tilta always thinks about accessorizing the existing gear that we have and kind of making solutions for filmmakers. I love that. Yeah. Cool. Let's move on to how do you say that? LALAL.AI Lynx.
To be honest, don't know exactly also. But
What is this? This is a new neural model built exclusively for speech denoising. So it is powering their existing voice cleaner and voice and noise stem. The standout use case here is you can strip copyrighted background music from location or event footage while preserving the dialogue, which is pretty cool. So if you have, let's say somebody speaking on stage for an event and there's music in the background, the typical thing for a shoot would always be to tell them, turn the music off, otherwise we can't use the footage. Sometimes you might not have the opportunity to make that happen, and this model promises to clean out that audio in the background. So it's, in terms of it's an AI model, they say it's 6 times smaller than their Andromeda model, and their planned update targets far from mic speech. So also, again, probably the kind of voice reconstruction that things like the voice enhancer by Adobe and so on does, which essentially isn't really cleaning up audio. It's recreating what you're saying in your own voice and then kind of spitting it out. I had this weird experience with the Adobe speech enhancer in an early version, that beta on the web, where I said a word and then it replaced it with a different word that sounded similar. I think it replaced the word microphone with Microsoft. And suddenly I said Microsoft in my own voice, even though I never said it. That's kind of scary because those tools are not actually cleaning up the audio. They are really recreating it. But of course, they're getting better and more convincing. So it's quite interesting. This is more accessible and cheaper than Isotope RX. I think we're talking about, it starts at $10 a month, and then there's a pro version for $20 a month. But the Isotope remains a deeper repair toolkit with a perpetual license. And And then, as I said, the free option here is still the Adobe Podcast Enhance, which doesn't have a lot of, like sliders to change stuff.
I think it's also not free anymore. They started to
the podcast
Adobe. I think.
It's only for subscribers.
Even not for subscriber, you need to pay extra, even if you're a subscriber. I think they kind of try to squeeze out money from everything right now.
That's Adobe. That's the Adobe way. Well, anyway.
But generally I have to say I know this company from a couple of years ago as a stem separation tool for you could import like a music piece and you could use the drums or the vocals and stuff. So for that purpose it was cool. Generally I think it's crazy how good those audio enhancers are getting, and the thing that is lacking, in my opinion, I think even if with this tool or also Adobe, is the lack of really detailed settings that you can kind of put in. And I think there is, one professional tool that I really like. It's Auphonic that has this, which is also a audio enhancer, but there you at least can kind of set a lot of parameters and stuff that really, basically you can work very consistent, because otherwise with those, you put in some audio files. Sometimes you get this result and sometimes you get this. And so that's sometimes a bit hard, because if you, for example, are doing a podcast every week, you want to have a consistent processing over all the episodes. And I think this is a big thing that those solutions are not offering yet.
That's good. It's like a black box. You don't know what's happening. So, interesting. All right, let's move on to the I think it's called MOFAGE, I don't know. MOFAGE POCO 2 drop-in filter, which is now available to order. Now, for those of you who remember, the original MOFAGE POCO was really released as a budget-friendly PL mount adapter for various mirrorless camera systems with an integrated drop-in variable ND, and it has become quite popular. It evolved into a full ecosystem with new filters and camera mounts added along the way. But the interesting thing, the original version quickly became one of the most interesting alternatives to a matte box, right? Because you had suddenly you had a variable ND for a camera that didn't have a built-in variable ND, and you didn't actually have to screw on a filter in front or use a matte box, so you could just have that behind the lens. And there were some limitations, especially regarding compatibility with certain PL mount lenses. And now it has all the same features as the original, but now the front lens mount is also swappable. So you can use and you can move between ARRI PL and Canon EF mounts. So that's really cool. It's actually one mount that can be used for both PL and EF lenses. And there's also a second generation variable ND module that seems to be accommodating lenses with longer rear protruding elements, which was one, of course, of the limitations of the original PL version. Because, I mean, that's one of the standard problems you have with a lot of those PL mounts, is that they're different protruding elements with some lenses. So you can't use every PL lens with every PL adapter, which always for a long time has been a problem. And they're trying to address that. For example, now this, makes it compatible with lenses like the Nisi Athena, which had a longer protruding element that didn't previously fit. So quite nice. This new filter is already available in B&H, and officially for the ARRI PL version, it's $440 and $340 for the EF version. And then there's, of course, you can buy the interchangeable mount for each one, vice versa now, as I said. So it's quite accessible if you want a very versatile EF or PL mount for your camera with a built-in variable ND option. Of course, then at the end here, my last topic is the MZed plug. So really, really cool article from Masha again. It's called Beyond the Cut. And she's writing about dissolves, morphs, and other transitions, wipes, and where they really serve the story. This ties really closely to Masha's Mighty Cut webinar, which we've talked about before, which is now also available on MZed. as a recording. And she really talks about how those, like kind of non-standard hard cuts actually help tell a story, and where to use them and where not to use them. We know a lot of beginners in filmmaking actually seem to overuse transitions, cross dissolves. It's like two images don't fit together, just add a cross dissolve and nobody will see it. Well, professionals like us will see it and will be annoyed by it because it has a different meaning. And you will learn where it actually makes sense to use those dissolves, morphs, and other transitions in this article. All right, that's it for this week. Thank you, Felix. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Stay tuned for next week's episode. It's going to be a really exciting one with a new camera review that Johnny is working on right now. And don't forget to write us any questions, comments on podcast@cinedy.com. Leave a comment on the YouTube video or the article. And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And hear you next week.